let's regroup, right? Just give everyone a second to regather. So what we did in the background while you were having a short break there was we ran the numbers on the heat maps, right? So I wanted to be able to produce these results for you to be able to see real time. And I got to say, I'm actually fascinated. So I look forward to some discussion about this, right? So we started with this, right? We have these 4 big scenarios, and we talked about the notion of expected and preferred, right? And then this is how it plotted out, right? So this is your results. I think I got everybody in. I just had to stop it right there at the end. So the blue is the expected and the green is the preferred, if you can see that on the screen, right? The size of the circle indicates so the bigger the circle, the more responses. So I think there's 17 responses just in this one circle here, right? And you can see that the preferred distributes sort of across, but the average point on the preferred is just about 8.8, right? So right about there. There's obviously a few sort of outliers, but the concentration is really in this area here, which was the all of Iowa thrives scenario. If you see some kind of color underneath, you'll see there's a green dot down here, and you'll see that some of these green ones have, like, there's another dot, there's a blue dot behind it, right? So the expected down here, the average point on the expected was 4.5 on the x-axis and about 5 on the y-axis. So in about here, the majority of responses are in, well, that's the average, but there are majority of responses in this area. So really quite fascinating from a couple of points of view, right? Having seen this before. One is that you all have a relatively similar view, right? If you look at the concentration, there's always kind of going to be sort of outliers for various different reasons. And actually, when we do this, when we run this on the portal, you'll be able to filter this and look at the responses. For example, people from, you could combine counties. You could say, okay, let me show you all the, the northern counties versus the southern counties, or the rural versus the urban, or people who are interested in community or environmental or economic, and be able to tease the data apart. But interestingly, overall, there's a really common kind of a thread line here of sort of thinking that the insanity doing the same thing, expecting a different result, or some kind of iteration of that scenario, is the expected future, but the preferred future for the vast majority of people is firmly anchored smack in the middle of this all of Iowa thrives. And what this presents then really is, from a strategic planning and a strategic positioning point of view, it shows that there's a desire for movement on 2 critical axes. So both these axes, so pivoting from somewhere here in terms of the development approach to pivoting over here in terms of development approach, so leaning right into that innovation focus, not getting kind of completely on steroids out on the end, but leaning significantly into that innovation focus, at the same time as leaning to the vertical. So sort of moving from the retool, retrain, attract type approach, leaning into the laboratory of learning. And I think the sort of synergy here is the coupling together of these 2 directions to land in that scenario. And I know there's a lot of people on, but I just thought it might be cool if anybody wanted to kind of make a comment or ask a question about the results from this, because personally, I think it's just intriguing, right? That, we hear people talk about different views, but there's actually quite a lot of commonality, and certainly the sort of where the consensus lies. And interesting, quite an appetite. I mean, there is a bubble of people up here in the 10-10, but a pretty big appetite for change. So reflections on that, thoughts, reactions, anybody? I can't see you all, so if you just want to holler out.
I was just concerned, David, that if I had put in, 11-11, that it would have broke the survey.
Yeah, it might have excluded you if you did that. I'd have to go and have a look if there's any 11-11s, right? Any other sort of comments or thoughts?
David, I was just wondering how we pivot from where we are, or the policies and directions that we're heading into this new area.
Yeah.
And that the political aspect of that as well, how that's pushed by government.
Yeah, so thanks. And that's kind of exactly to the next point, right? Which is, well, how do we, right? So if we're seeing sort of agreement around this, right? Not everybody, but the vast majority of people, there's a real common here. So if you want to think about a shared vision or a shared desired direction, we're able to articulate that pretty clearly now. And obviously the scenario description helps build that out. The next piece for today, and we're just going to spend a short period on this, is trying to figure out exactly to your question, Art, which is, what do we need to do to make this pivot, right? And to do it fairly fast. The other thing I wanted to show you was in the terms of the question of urgency. So how quickly do we think stakeholders need to adopt and pursue strategies to achieve this preferred vision? So 10 being critically urgent, which is here. Not at all urgent down here. You can see that we've got a strong skew to a sense of urgency, right? And that's reflected also, I think, in the rapid polling, which is it's all happening to us now, right? And we have to deal with it, right? So what we want to now do today, just to start surfacing this conversation of how do we make this big strategic pivot. And by the way, that's going to be the focus of the sessions that we're running through October and November. So, and Karen will talk more about this, but we're planning to do a session in every county that wants us, right? And do a whole series of sector focus groups that are actually about building the strategy. Because if you look at this pivot, everyone's got a part to play in that. So, the various sort of industrial sectors, education, agriculture, manufacturing, all those sort of groups, right? As well as the various communities in the county. So we want to be digging down into this. But how we want to just tackle that today, just for a short period, is we're going to send you off into breakout groups again, because it's pretty difficult on a large sort of 80-person Zoom, but we want to give you smaller groups to be able to talk through on this, and we're going to just give you 20 minutes or so just to talk with each other about high-level strategic actions. And this is just a brainstorm, right? So it's not trying to figure out the answer. We're going to invest a lot more time in that, but we want to just, while this is hot on our minds, think about, okay, what are some of the things we could be thinking about that would help us make that pivot towards the innovation focus and towards the laboratory of learning. And both of those are going to require new ideas, just the language of laboratory of learning, thinking about shifting values, thinking about, perhaps new investment streams, activating, innovation and so on. Clearly that's what people want. So now let's have some discussion about how we can start to accomplish that. So we're going to give you, so Brittany's going to send you off into, Brittany, how many groups are we going to have?
We're going to have 7 groups of about 11 to 12 people, and I'm going to copy and paste the facilitators for each one. And I don't know, David, you may be able to speak to what facilitators are going to do in this one, but I think it's more casual.
Yeah, so, and this is going to be fast paced. We just want, while this is on your mind, right? You've been stewing on this all day, right? We want to just capture, what are your okay, what are the 5 top things we need to do? Here's what right? People want to address this now. There's a sense of urgency. There's appetite for a change, right? There's a recognition that there's a moment. You have a moment as a region, and there's a desire to pivot on both those axes. Think about laboratory learning, think about innovation focus. How do you make that happen, right? And this is truly created. I would not go to a textbook for an economic development strategy in this conversation. I think the playbook that you need to invent, that we need to develop over the next couple of months, is going to be a pretty original playbook on how you can push forward as a region towards your preferred future. Why I say that, if the playbook was there, you probably would have already done it, right? You're smart enough to do that, right? But given the context we're in, I think this is where you get a chance now to apply some creative thinking, take the shackles off a little bit here and sort of be ambitious in, okay, what are some things we can look at other places, or we can learn, or our hunch about how do we build some key strategic actions to make that pivot, right? So we're going to give you 20 minutes, right? Fast paced. We're going to have, I think Brittany's put in the chat, the facilitators. Yep, great. So we've got Les in group 1, Kristen in group 2, Tom 3, Jennifer 4, Adam 5, Mary 6, Derek in 7. Thank you, facilitators, right? Their job basically is to just capture and synthesize and report back. We'll just have 1-minute report backs after this just remember, this is just the start of building strategy, but we want to capture it right now while it's hot on your mind, okay? So into your groups, we'll have you back in 20 minutes. All right, fantastic, right? So welcome back, everybody. So we're going to do this lickety split. So we just have a 1 minute kind of report out or thereabouts from each group. We're just going to go 1 to 7. So the order's Les, Kristen, Tom, Jennifer, Adam, Mary, and then Derek, okay? And what we're just reporting back out on is just ideas around high levels, key strategic actions or priorities to get from that sort of expected to the preferred future, which is sort of right up there or right in the middle of the all Iowa thrives scenario. So Les, can we start with you? And you're on mute, Les.
All right. Well, we tried to get our ideas into 5, and weren't very successful, but we're close. I'll run through them very quickly. We think that it's really important to get economic development organizations on board with this new direction. We think it's really important to communicate at the state level what we're trying to do to set the stage for resources. We have a number of concerns about immediate actions to build the workforce, including expanding our pool of qualified applicants, improving our ability to recruit and retain diverse population, understanding the skills that are needed and building partnerships between business and education to meet those skills, creating on-ramps and off-ramps for lifelong learning. We think investments in affordable, available housing, preferably within existing community footprints, with a variety of forms to meet changing lifestyles. Rethinking transportation. We think we could develop a model, a jewel of a transportation system, and there are models around the country that we could look at. We don't have to create it. And that innovations in childcare and education across the board, so that we can be responsive to the changing family patterns of, for example, of dual earning families and people who have working 2 shifts.
Yeah, great, Les. You know, and I loved how some of those you start to get into some really kind of sort of tactile kind of description, you know, like the housing, like really starting to narrow that lens on exactly what you want to accomplish within the same footprint, diverse options and so on, right? So great. All right, thank you. So Kristen, you're next.
Yeah, we also focused a lot on workforce, childcare, education, environmental. So many of the same things Les said around workforce. One idea that we had was our strategy was utilizing public schools for adult education for upskilling and reskilling, both in soft and hard skills. We also had a lot of talk around the school to workforce / business pipeline, what that looks like, how do we get to kids and being able to help them understand what's available to them. We talked a lot about also helping and training employers and businesses to understand the culture that workforce wants and needs and how to execute that. In natural resources, environmental, we talked about advocating for creating a plan for zero waste and clean energy goals. Around the like the cultural areas, just creating a positive regional narrative around the placemaking to be able to share around both the Midwest and the nation. And that placemaking is that thought of, we have the quality of life that people want. We've got the balance between being able to work, and it's not just about going to a job, it's about picking where you want to live, and then you find a job there. Those are probably, and childcare, ensuring that it's available to everyone to shore up the workforce.
Yeah, great, excellent, right? And you can really hear, like both with Les and what you talked about, Kristen, you can really start to hear the big kind of themes developing, which are going to obviously be some of these big strategic focus areas, like as we start to build out the plan further. So thank you. So Tom, your group 3.
Yeah, we had a laundry list of things, and I've tried to distill them into a handful. Childcare, transportation, affordable housing, all were part of these dialogues. But broadly, how do we continue to advocate and support grassroots movements that are inclusive in nature, that bring all the voice to the table, that can leverage established institutions into new pathways forward with this voice? Public-private partnerships. How do we get, and beyond that, how do we incentivize the behaviors we want and move those with intention? Do our policies align with our desired outcomes? Let's start with kind of what barriers we've put up to restrict us from where we'd like to go. Play the long game and play it with intentionality. Those were kind of the buckets and themes. So if anybody from our group wants to add, I've kind of distilled them down into a short.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, and I think that's really, really smart to think to really profile this as the long game. You know, there's not quick fixes. You know what you're talking about in terms of that pivot, but also the pieces you're laying out here collectively is systemic change, right? You are looking at ecosystem systemic change, and that does not happen overnight. But you playing the long game, you can start to at least put the building blocks in and start to trigger that change, which will take a while. And I wouldn't underestimate what that's going to take in terms of cultural norms and so on as well, right? Jennifer, group 4.
So ours was much less of a punch list and more of kind of a discussion around communication and tensions and overcoming tensions. We want to make sure that we're communicating a shared goal and that we communicate that carefully, understanding that we don't want to pit anyone against each other, that we have, again, a great place to live, and we want to support that and make sure that we have the type of infrastructure that allows everyone to access the life they want here in our area. We talked about engagement and making sure that we had a wide range of folks involved in this communication to get ideas from them, not to presume what they need. We talked about this idea of partnerships and competition, where you've got, competing needs, competing unique and special resources like farmland and our way of life, our small community way of life, and the things competing for that, like sprawling development or even renewable energy projects that might take up a lot of space. And it could have, it was farmland and now it's a renewable energy resource. And also our urban areas and our smaller towns competing or in partnership with each other to attract development and to attract jobs and companies and growth. So that was kind of our discussion, centered a lot on communication.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jennifer. That's fantastic. I think that's a good kind of reminder, because while we might have a nice big core of sort of 80 plus people have been involved through this process, right? There's, a lot more people in the region, right? So bringing other stakeholders and having people understand the kind of trajectory is going to be absolutely critical. Thank you. Adam, group 5.
Yep. We initially indicated, we need to invest in human infrastructure and that traditional forms of economic development, well, obviously will always be there, but maybe some more emphasis needs to be placed on people. And so that was part of it. Understanding why we're heading in the direction that we all expect that we're heading is critical to trying to figure out how we're going to go forward with the way we want it to be. So what are those factors that are leading us in that direction, and then trying to address those factors so that we can actually get to where we want to go. Leverage our existing businesses. They often do drive innovation and change. We don't have to start over. We don't have to completely start over from scratch. Recognizing, though, that there's system biases in some of the older systems that need to be addressed. And so, but that's not a hurdle that is insurmountable. What's motivating our change, and what can we do to incentivize businesses to innovate as a thought? Develop maybe some core, what we would consider to be the core issues or goals that we as a region want to address. And I'm going to try to synthesize this. Determine what organizations should be partners in achieving those goals. and developing accountability to those goals and the metrics around them. So essentially plan accountability and measuring how we're going to get to where we want to get to. Gauge systems to accomplish the goals we want to accomplish, develop collective impacts. And these aren't, I don't know, these are strategic action plans. These are just kind of some of the comments and thoughts, but realize that we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. One last thing is keep it simple.
Yeah.
Try to make it a 300-page plan versus something that's a little bit more edible,
Yeah.
I guess. So
yeah, it's got to be accessible for people, and it's got to be galvanized. You got to activate the system, right? So that needs to be available. Yeah. Thank you, Adam. Great. Mary, Group 6.
Sure. So our group talked a little bit about just needing to sort of reinvent the workforce model. We talked a lot about fostering innovation in the region and looking at ways to invest in entrepreneurship and finding financing, building relationships with private equity markets. We talked about kind of transforming what school really means. And I know that there are already programs that create job shadow opportunities or internships for students, but really trying to find or continue to expand on mechanisms that allow kids to really see themselves working in this area and staying in this area and working in the jobs that we have or that we're building towards. We also brought up the topic of childcare and helping employers and possibly the schools to see what role they may play. We talked about needing to have housing options for people, not just housing though, those other things that need to almost be customized to meet the needs of people who want to live in this area or who are living in this area. And rather than funneling people into what exists, maybe trying to figure out, reverse that a little bit and look and see more what specifically people need. So we have a variety of housing options. We have a variety of transportation options. And then we talked a little bit about, because of sort of the changing workplace and that type of thing, trying to find ways to assist businesses or HR departments with, maybe prospective policy changes or procedures that they can put in place that could help to accommodate employees.
Great. Thank you, Mary. Last group, 7, Derek.
All right, so our group looked at it from 2 perspectives. We did our long end game of here's where we want to be at the end of this, but then we stepped back and said, what are some strategic steps our region can take to help us get to those? So we came up with 5. The first one being massive investments in wind and solar. And so that would be a state level action. So something we may not directly impact immediately, but one of the things that we can do from a local level is engaging private sectors, residential, industrial, to build out for wind and solar on their own, and then showcase that data to the legislature that says this is happening. We have these people. You need to make these massive investments if we're going to be in these markets. The second category was increasing the eligibility for innovation funding. So things like the Industry 4.0 and Manufacturing 4.0 grants, making sure that we had that expanded for all of those types of funding to all types of businesses, rural, urban, small jobs, high job counts, and making sure that we're doing workforce investment and upskilling those people. And this one was pretty much the main thing we can do, since that's a legislative action, is a coordinated lobbying effort among the different parties to get that done at a state level. The third one we came on was broadband strength. We needed to increase that. And the thing we came up as our local strategic level action was getting a local data collection map on the actual built environment of what broadband exists, and then researching and looking into the possibility of public owned utilities for broadband to make it more accessible. Our fourth one was investing in existing physical infrastructure. And this is more from a quality of life standpoint and a density focus, since sprawl is sort of the key factor in our current makeup. And the thing here that came out of that, our strategic level action, was focusing at our local levels on making zoning a little more useful to some of those purposes, quality of life and density. And then finally, we ended up with robust childcare, including 24/7 availability and using the ARPA funding that's out to highlight some of these issues. And we came up with 2 different steps here that could work in tandem. One, partnering with the Iowa Women's Foundation to do a regional plan for what childcare might look like in our region or even our state. But then 2, working with schools like high schools to make daycare a trade. Just like there's the Building Trades program, why isn't there a daycare or preschool trade program to teach high school students about the industry and what they might be able to do and affect in that industry? And also reimagining places like big box stores that might be sitting empty. How could those be reimagined into daycare spaces or daycare incubators where we could also get some of that hands-on training? So those were sort of the 5 topic areas we hit with our local strategic level action.
Great, thanks, Derek. Really appreciate that. So, I just want to do a call out to the facilitators. Really thank you for doing the lift on that, carrying the water. Make sure you send your notes in. So I guess probably to one of the EasyCog staff, Brittany or Adam, if you can just photograph them, scan them, whatever, right? Just make sure we get them in. Or else we'll come hunting for you, right, to get the notes, right? But I do want to just kind of just sort of draw this to an end and then I'm going to ask Karen to sort of make a few comments towards the end here. And I just want to really just say, just congratulations on hanging in there today, right? I mean, I don't know, we've all done enough Zooms to probably keep us, our saturation levels pretty high, right? But you hung in all day, right? And this has been a big and deep conversation. And if we just look at what was accomplished today, we dealt with trajectory, right? So you've answered the question of where you want to go and answered that in a pretty clear way in terms of a shared vision for the future. And we have at least a really good working description of that from Kristen's group in terms of building out that scenario, right? So we handled the question of trajectory. I think we've also really pushed in on the question of velocity, right? So there's a desire to move fast, there's a sense of urgency, and there's a sense to move quickly in this process. And they're massive building blocks for essentially what is the first major piece of this project to build out a strategy. The next piece, of course, is, and obviously we're going to get the report up and share the slide decks and get the data visualization up. But the next big building phase of this is to those October and November focus groups that we talked about. Like I said, we want to do one in each county. We want to do one in a number of different sectors, right? So we'll be looking for people to help us convene those. So we want to take, we'll obviously synthesize your ideas here that you've just presented, but we want to use this as the starting point for those discussions at that local level and build those out even further. I think the key to this is going to be to have a strategy that people can see how it works at different scales and in different sectors for the region. So just awesome job, right? And that's an enormous amount of ground that we covered today, and you just absorbed and assimilated a fantastic amount of information. And I don't know about you, but to me, it looks really exciting, right? I'd be feeling pretty jazzed if I was in that region and I was working all day with, nearly 100 other people to figure out what are the big forces that are shaping us, where do we want to go, how fast do we want to move, and what are our primary building blocks, right? So I think that's just a really excellent day's work, and I think it sets us up for the rest of the process really well. So Karen, can I hand this to you for some concluding remarks, and we might even get everybody out a little bit early.
Sounds good. First of all, I really want to thank David and Heather for guiding us through this conversation today. It's been enlightening and energizing and just really exciting in terms of how we start to think about the future. And I know certainly as someone that's relatively new to the region, I really feel like I learned a lot about what different people think. As far as all the participants on the call, thank you, or the Zoom meeting, thank you so much for your participation. It's a lot of time to give, and we're very cognizant of that. And I want you to consider yourself now anointed. If you think this is valuable and this is an important conversation to have, please help us to engage more people into the process. As David said, this was the visioning part. Now we're going to be kind of morphing more into the strategy and tactics to kind of advance the vision. So there will be more conversations. You're now all on our mailing list, and we will be making you aware of when and the focus, when those conversations will be held and the focus of those conversations. So please join us in subsequent meetings and help us get the word out. And with that, you can follow along with the project and then access the slide deck and a recording of this meeting again at Talk to ECOG. That's all one word. Talk to ECOG.
Actually, talk to
ECICOG. We think we've got it in the chat box, .org, and we'll be continually updating that as we move forward with the project, in addition to sending out our email blasts. So thank you again so much from the ECOG team and from the strategy committee for your time today.